The scorching August sun beat down on Agua Caliente, Arizona territory, in 1878 as Louisa Wright hammered a piece of pewter into submission, her leather apron protecting her dress from the molten droplets that occasionally spattered from her work. The heat from the furnace combined with the desert temperature made sweat bead on her forehead. But she had long ago learned to ignore discomfort when creating something beautiful. At 22 years old, she had worked alongside her father, Thomas Wright, in his pewter shop since she was tall enough to reach the workbench. And now her skilled hands could shape the silvery metal into anything from candlesticks to buckles, with an artistry that rivaled his own. The bell above the shop door chimed, and Louisa glanced up from her work to see a figure that seemed to fill the entire doorway. The man standing there was unlike any customer who had ever entered her father's establishment. He stood well over 6 feet tall, with shoulders so broad they nearly brushed both sides of the frame. Long dark hair fell past his collar, and a thick beard covered much of his tanned face. His buckskin clothing was worn and weathered, and a hunting knife hung at his belt alongside what appeared to be several pouches. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, a piercing gray that seemed to look right through her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Can I help you?" she asked, setting down her hammer and wiping her hands on a cloth. The mountain man stepped inside, his movements surprisingly graceful for someone so large and muscular. "Need a new cup?" he said, his voice deep and rough from disuse. "Mine got crushed by a rockfall up in the mountains." Louisa nodded and moved to the display shelf where finished pieces sat waiting for purchase. "We have several. Are you looking for something simple or decorated?" He approached the shelf, and she caught the scent of pine, leather, and wood smoke that clung to him. It was not unpleasant, merely different from the metallic tang she had lived with all her life. His massive hands, scarred and calloused, picked up one of the simpler cups with surprising delicacy. "This one," he said. "How much?" $2, Louisa replied, watching as he examined the craftsmanship. She had made that particular piece herself just last week, and she felt an odd flutter of nervousness waiting for his assessment. The mountain man nodded and reached into one of his pouches, pulling out coins that he counted carefully before handing them to her. Their fingers brushed during the exchange, and Louisa felt a jolt run through her at the contact. His hands were rough but warm, and his eyes met hers for a moment that seemed to stretch longer than it should have. "Fine work," he said quietly. "You make this?" "I did," Louisa admitted, surprised he had asked. Most customers assumed her father created everything in the shop. Something shifted in his expression, though his features remained mostly impassive. "You have skill." Before she could respond, her father emerged from the back room where he had been working on a large commission. Thomas Wright was a stout man in his 50s, with gray beginning to thread through his brown hair and a perpetually cheerful disposition. "Louisa, did you remember to check the temperature on the crucible? We cannot have it getting too hot, or it will ruin the entire batch." He stopped short when he saw their customer. "Oh, forgive me. I did not realize we had someone in the shop." "Just finished," the mountain man said, holding up his new cup. "Good day to you both." He turned and left as suddenly as he had arrived, and Louisa found herself staring at the door long after it had closed behind him. "Strange fellow," her father commented. "Mountain men do not usually come down to town, except for supplies a few times a year. Wonder what brought him here." Louisa returned to her workbench, but found her concentration broken. She kept thinking about those gray eyes and the way he had handled her cup with such care despite his rough appearance. There had been something lonely about him, something that called to a part of her she had not known existed until that moment. The days passed in their usual rhythm. Louisa woke before dawn to help prepare breakfast for herself and her father, then spent the morning working in the shop. The afternoons were dedicated to more delicate work that required better light, and evenings found her sweeping up metal shavings and preparing everything for the next day. It was a good life, predictable and safe. But sometimes she wondered if there was more beyond the walls of the pewter shop and the dusty streets of Agua Caliente. Her mother had died when Louisa was only 8 years old, succumbing to a fever that no doctor could cure. After that, it had been just her and her father, two people bound together by grief and craft. Thomas had poured his sorrow into teaching his daughter everything he knew about metalworking, and Louisa had absorbed it all with a dedication born of wanting to ease his pain. Now she could not imagine doing anything else. Yet sometimes, in the quiet moments between hammering and polishing, she felt a restlessness she could not name. A week after the mountain man's visit, Louisa was alone in the shop when trouble arrived in the form of 3 cowboys who had clearly spent too much time in the saloon across the street. They stumbled through the door, laughing and shoving each other, their voices loud and their movements unsteady. "Well, what do we have here?" the tallest one said, his words slurring slightly. "Pretty little thing all alone." Louisa straightened her spine and fixed them with her most professional expression. "Gentlemen, if you are here to make a purchase, I would be happy to help you. Otherwise, I must ask you to leave." "Oh, she must ask us to leave," the second man mocked, elbowing his companion. "Did you hear that? Little girl giving us orders." The third man, shorter but stockier than the others, moved closer to her workbench. "Maybe we want to buy something. Maybe we want to buy you." Fear prickled along Louisa's spine, but she refused to show it. "My father will return any moment. I suggest you go before he does." "Your father is over at the general store," the tall one said. "We saw him leave. Looks like you are all alone with us." Louisa's hand moved slowly toward the hammer on her workbench, but the stocky man was faster. He grabbed her wrist and pulled her forward, and she cried out more from anger than fear. The smell of cheap whiskey washed over her as he leaned close. "Let me go," she demanded, trying to wrench free. The door exploded inward with such force that it bounced off the wall. The mountain man stood in the doorway, and the rage on his face was terrifying. In 3 long strides, he crossed the shop, grabbed the stocky cowboy by the back of his shirt, and physically threw him out the door. The man landed hard in the street, dust billowing around him. The other 2 cowboys sobered quickly when they saw the size and fury of what they were dealing with. The tall one reached for his gun, but the mountain man was faster. A massive fist connected with his jaw, and he went down like a felled tree. The remaining cowboy held up his hands and backed toward the door. "We did not mean nothing," he stammered. "Just having some fun." "Fun?" The mountain man's voice was deadly quiet. "You call terrorizing a woman fun?" He advanced on the cowboy, who turned and ran, helping his unconscious friend up and dragging him away. The stocky one had already scrambled to his feet and disappeared around the corner. In a matter of seconds, the shop was quiet again, except for the sound of Louisa's rapid breathing. The mountain man turned to her, and the rage melted from his features, replaced by concern. "Are you hurt?" Louisa shook her head, surprised to find her hands trembling. "No, I am fine, thank you. I do not know what would have happened if you had not come. I was passing by, heard the commotion." He moved closer, his eyes scanning her carefully, as if to confirm she truly was unharmed. "You should not be here alone. I have been working in this shop alone many times," Louisa said, a touch of defensiveness in her voice. This has never happened before. First time for everything, he replied. World is not always kind to women on their own. Louisa sank down onto the stool by her workbench, the adrenaline leaving her system and making her legs feel weak. My father will be horrified when he hears about this. The mountain man was quiet for a moment, then moved to right the door that still hung askew on its hinges. With a few expert movements, he had it functioning properly again. Name is Henry Harrison, he said as he worked. I have a cabin up in the mountains about a day's ride from here. Louisa Wright, she replied, watching his capable hands make the repairs. Why did you come back to town so soon? You said mountain men only come down a few times a year. Henry paused in his work, his back to her. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. Had my reasons. Something in his tone made her wonder if one of those reasons had to do with her. But she dismissed the thought as foolish. Why would a man like him, who clearly valued his solitude, be interested in a pewter worker's daughter? Thomas returned a few minutes later, laden with supplies from the general store. His face went pale when he saw Henry and heard what had transpired. He insisted on paying Henry for his help, but the mountain man refused. Just glad I was here, Henry said simply. But I would advise you not to leave your daughter alone in the shop anymore. Those men might come back, or others like them. You're absolutely right, Thomas said, wringing his hands. Louisa, from now on, when I must leave, you will close the shop and come with me. Father, that is impractical, Louisa protested. We cannot close every time you need to run an errand. Then I will hire someone to stay in the shop, Thomas insisted. Or perhaps... He looked at Henry with a speculative expression. Are you staying in town for a while, Mr. Harrison? Was planning to head back to the mountains tomorrow, Henry replied. What if I could give you a reason to stay a few more days? Thomas asked. I could use someone with your obvious strength and capability around the shop. Just for a week or two, until I can make other arrangements. I would pay you, of course, and provide meals. Henry's gray eyes flicked to Louisa, and she felt that same jolt of awareness she had experienced during their first meeting. What kind of work? Oh, nothing difficult for a man of your abilities, Thomas said eagerly. Moving heavy materials, perhaps helping with some repairs I have been putting off. And of course, ensuring that my daughter remains safe while she works. Louisa opened her mouth to protest that she did not need a bodyguard. But something made her close it again. The truth was, she felt safer with Henry in the room. And more than that, she found herself wanting him to stay. There was something about him that drew her. Something beyond his obvious physical strength and the way he had defended her without hesitation. I will stay a week, Henry said finally. But I do not need payment. Just meals and a place to sleep. Thomas beamed. Excellent. There is a small room in the back of the shop that we use for storage. It is not much, but we can clear it out and make it comfortable. And Louisa is an excellent cook, so you will not go hungry. That evening, Louisa found herself preparing a larger supper than usual while Henry and her father cleared out the storage room. She made venison stew with vegetables from their small garden, fresh bread, and apple pie from their dwindling supply of preserved fruit. It felt strange to cook for someone other than her father, and she caught herself wondering whether Henry would like her food. When she called them to the table, Henry appeared with his long hair still damp from washing at the pump outside. Without the layer of trail dust, she could see that he was younger than she had initially thought. Probably no more than 26 or 27. His face had the weathered look of someone who spent most of their time outdoors. But there was intelligence in those gray eyes and a gentleness in his movements that contrasted with his intimidating size. Smells good, Henry said as he sat down in the chair that seemed too small for his large frame. They ate in relative silence at first, with only Thomas making occasional comments about the day's work and his plans for upcoming commissions. Louisa watched Henry from under her lashes, noticing how carefully he ate, as if he were unused to sitting at a proper table with other people. It made her wonder how long he had been living alone in the mountains and what had driven him to such solitude. "Mr. Harrison," she said finally, breaking the comfortable quiet. "How long have you been living in the mountains?" 7 years, Henry replied, not looking up from his stew. 7 years? Thomas repeated in astonishment. That is a long time to be away from civilization. Do you not miss people? Henry's jaw tightened slightly. No. The single word held such finality that Thomas dropped the subject. But Louisa found herself more curious than ever. What had happened 7 years ago to drive this man away from society? What was he running from, or perhaps trying to forget? After supper, Henry insisted on helping clean up despite Thomas's protests. Louisa found herself standing next to him at the washing basin, acutely aware of his presence as she washed dishes and he dried them with a cloth. His hands dwarfed the plates he handled, yet he never fumbled or dropped anything. "Thank you again for earlier," Louisa said softly. "Those men might have really hurt me." "Could not let that happen," Henry said, his voice equally quiet. "Not right. Men treating women that way." "Have you always been a protector?" she asked, handing him another dish. Henry was silent for so long she thought he would not answer. "Used to be a soldier," he finally said. "Long time ago, before I went to the mountains." "A soldier," Louisa repeated, pieces of the puzzle starting to fit together. "The war." He nodded once, shortly. The war between the states had ended 13 years ago, but its scars remained on the men who had fought in it. Louisa had seen veterans around town, some missing limbs, others carrying invisible wounds that showed only in haunted eyes and sudden starts at loud noises. "Is that why you left?" she asked gently. "Part of it." Henry set down the dish he had been drying and looked directly at her. "Saw things no man should see. Did things I am not proud of. When it ended, I could not go back to regular life. Everything felt wrong. Too loud, too crowded, too full of people who had no idea what we had been through. The mountains were quiet, peaceful, made sense in a way that nothing else did." Louisa felt her heart ache for him. She could not imagine carrying such burdens alone for 7 years. "And you have been there ever since? Completely alone?" "Mostly. Sometimes I trade with trappers or Indians passing through. Come to town twice a year for supplies I cannot make or hunt myself. That is enough." "That sounds very lonely," Louisa said before she could stop herself. Henry looked at her with an expression she could not quite read. "Was," he said. "Before?" "Before what?" she asked. But he had already turned away, hanging up the drying cloth. "Should check on the horses," he said. "Good night, Miss Wright." He left through the back door, and Louisa stood staring after him, her mind whirling with questions and an emotion she could not quite name. The next morning, Louisa woke earlier than usual and took extra care with her appearance, telling herself it had nothing to do with Henry's presence in the house. She braided her long brown hair and pinned it up neatly, then put on her second-best dress before covering it with her work apron. When she came downstairs, she found Henry already up and sitting at the table, carefully oiling his knife. "Good morning," she said, moving to start breakfast. "How did you sleep?" "Fine," Henry replied. "Bed was comfortable, thank you." "You do not have to thank me," Louisa said, cracking eggs into a bowl. "You are doing us a great service by staying." "Not doing much," Henry said. "Just being here." "Sometimes that is exactly what is needed," Louisa replied. She cooked eggs, bacon, and hash with practiced efficiency. And soon the kitchen filled with savory smells that brought her father downstairs. Thomas was in high spirits, clearly relieved to have someone watching over his daughter, and he chatted cheerfully through breakfast about his plans for the day's work. "Louisa, we need to start on the church commission today," he said. "Reverend Matthews wants those candlesticks finished by the end of the month. Henry, if you could help us move the large crucible, that would be very helpful. I have been putting off some bigger pieces because I could not manage it alone." The morning passed in focused work. Henry proved to be surprisingly helpful despite having no experience with metalworking. He seemed to understand instinctively when Louisa or her father needed an extra pair of hands, and his strength made tasks that normally took considerable effort seem effortless. Louisa found herself hyper-aware of his presence, noticing the way his muscles flexed as he lifted heavy materials, the concentration on his face as he watched her work, the occasional brush of his hand against hers when they reached for the same tool. Around midday, a well-dressed woman entered the shop with her young daughter. Mrs. Henderson was one of their regular customers, always commissioning new pieces for her home. She stopped short when she saw Henry, her eyes widening slightly. "My goodness, Thomas, who is this?" she asked with obvious interest. "This is Henry Harrison," Thomas replied. "He is helping out in the shop for a while." Mrs. Henderson's gaze swept over Henry with unconcealed curiosity, and Louisa felt an unexpected surge of protectiveness. She knew how small-town gossip worked, and by evening everyone would be talking about the mysterious mountain man working in the pewter shop. "How interesting," Mrs. Henderson said. "And how long will you be staying, Mr. Harrison?" "Not long," Henry replied, his voice flat and uninviting. Mrs. Henderson seemed to sense that she would get no more information and turned her attention to business. She wanted to commission a tea service for her niece's wedding in 2 months, something elaborate and worthy of being passed down through generations. Louisa discussed designs with her while Henry retreated to the back of the shop, clearly uncomfortable with the social interaction. After Mrs. Henderson left, Louisa found Henry outside checking on the horses. He stood with his hand on his horse's neck, a magnificent bay with intelligent eyes, and seemed lost in thought. "She means well," Louisa said, approaching quietly. "Mrs. Henderson, she is just curious. Not many strangers come through Agua Caliente." "I know the type," Henry said. "Always asking questions, wanting to know everyone's business." "It comes from living in a small town," Louisa said. "When nothing much happens, anything new becomes fascinating." Henry turned to look at her. "You grew up here?" "Born and raised," Louisa confirmed. "My mother came here with my father when they first married. She loved the desert, said it reminded her of the ocean somehow, all that open space." "You miss her?" Henry observed. It was not a question. "Every day," Louisa admitted. "But it has been 14 years. The pain is less sharp now, more of an ache that never quite goes away." "I understand that," Henry said quietly. "Lost my whole family in the war. Parents, 2 brothers, sister. They were not soldiers, just in the wrong place when armies came through." Louisa's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh, Henry, I am so sorry. I cannot imagine such loss." "Is why I left," Henry said, his eyes distant. "Could not stay in a place full of memories and ghosts. Mountains were empty, clean, no past haunting every corner." Without thinking, Louisa reached out and placed her hand on his arm. She felt him tense under her touch, but he did not pull away. "But now you have been alone for 7 years. That is a different kind of haunting. Henry looked down at her hand on his arm, then up at her face. Something shifted in his expression, a crack in the careful walls he had built around himself. It was easier being alone, he said. Did not hurt anyone, did not lose anyone, did not have to care. That sounds like existing, not living, Louisa said softly. Maybe so, Henry agreed. But it was safe. And now? She asked, her heart beating faster. Henry's hand came up to cover hers where it rested on his arm. His touch was gentle despite the calluses and scars. Now I am not so sure safe is enough anymore. They stood like that for a long moment, the desert heat beating down on them, horses shifting quietly nearby. Louisa felt as if she were standing on the edge of something vast and terrifying and wonderful all at once. Then her father called from inside the shop, breaking the spell, and they stepped apart. The days that followed fell into a pattern. Mornings were spent working in the shop, with Henry helping with the physical labor while Louisa and Thomas handled the intricate metalwork. Afternoons brought the heat of the day, and they would often take a break in the small courtyard behind the shop where a few scraggly trees provided minimal shade. Evenings were for supper and quiet conversation, with Henry slowly opening up about his life in the mountains. He told them about the cabin he had built with his own hands, the garden he tended, the wild animals that had become almost like companions. He spoke of the changing seasons in the high country, how snow could fall even in summer at the higher elevations, how the aspens turned gold in autumn and made the mountainsides look like they were on fire. His voice took on a different quality when he talked about these things, becoming almost lyrical, and Louisa found herself enchanted by his descriptions. In turn, she told him about her life in Agua Caliente, about learning her craft from her father, about the satisfaction of taking raw metal and shaping it into something beautiful and useful. She told him about the few times she had traveled, once to Phoenix and once to Tucson, and how the cities had felt overwhelming after the relative quiet of their small town. Would you ever want to leave? Henry asked one evening as they sat outside, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of orange and red. I used to think about it, Louisa admitted. When I was younger, I imagined traveling to San Francisco or even back east, seeing all the places I had only read about in books. But as I got older, I realized that home is not such a bad place to be. I have my father, my work, friends I have known my whole life. That counts for something. It counts for a lot, Henry said. I had that once. Took it for granted until it was gone. You could have it again, Louisa said, turning to look at him. You do not have to spend the rest of your life alone in the mountains. Henry met her eyes, and she saw longing there, mixed with fear. Would not know how to anymore. Been too long. I am not fit for regular society now. I think you are more fit than you believe, Louisa said. You have been here almost a week, and you have managed just fine. That is different, Henry protested. It is just you and your father. Small group, manageable. But a whole town? People everywhere, asking questions, wanting things? That is too much. Maybe you just need to start small, Louisa suggested. One person at a time, one connection at a time. She saw him consider this, saw the internal struggle playing out on his face. He had been alone so long that the idea of rejoining the world must seem impossibly daunting. But she also saw something else in his expression when he looked at her. Something warm and tender that made her pulse quicken. Maybe, he said finally, if I had the right reason. The week Henry had agreed to stay came to an end too quickly. On the 7th day, Louisa found herself moving through her work mechanically, dreading the moment when Henry would pack his things and ride back to his mountain cabin. The thought of returning to life, as it had been before he arrived, felt unbearably bleak. That evening, Thomas announced that he had to travel to Phoenix to meet with a potential client about a large commission for a hotel. It would mean being gone for 3 days, and he was clearly torn between the opportunity and his worry about leaving Louisa alone. "I could go with you," Louisa offered, though the thought of abandoning her own work for 3 days was frustrating. "The shop cannot close for that long," Thomas said. "We have too many orders pending. But I do not like the idea of you here alone, especially after what happened with those cowboys." Henry, who had been quietly eating his supper, set down his fork. "I could stay." Both Louisa and Thomas turned to look at him. "You would do that?" Thomas asked. "But I thought you needed to get back to your cabin." "Nothing there that cannot wait a few more days," Henry said. "And Miss Wright should not be alone." "That is very generous of you," Thomas said, relief evident in his voice. "I would pay you for your time, of course." "Not necessary," Henry replied. "Just being neighborly." Louisa's heart soared, even as she tried to keep her expression neutral. 3 more days with Henry. 3 days where it would be just the two of them in the shop, working side by side, sharing meals and conversation. It felt like a gift she had not dared to hope for. Thomas left early the next morning, giving Louisa extensive instructions about which orders to prioritize and making Henry promise at least 3 times to take good care of his daughter. After he finally climbed onto the wagon and headed down the dusty road toward Phoenix, Louisa and Henry stood in the doorway, watching until he disappeared from view. "Guess it is just us now," Henry said. "I guess so," Louisa replied, acutely aware of his presence beside her. "We should get to work. Those candlesticks will not make themselves." They settled into the rhythm of work, but there was a new intimacy to it now that they were alone. Louisa found herself talking more freely, sharing thoughts and dreams she had never spoken aloud before. Henry listened with an intensity that made her feel truly heard, and gradually he began to share more of himself as well. He told her about his childhood on a farm in Virginia, about lazy summer days fishing with his brothers and helping his mother in her vegetable garden. He told her about his sister who had loved to sing and his father who had been strong and gentle, and taught his sons to treat all people with respect, regardless of their station in life. His voice grew thick with emotion when he spoke of them. And Louisa understood that these memories were precious things he rarely allowed himself to examine. "They would have liked you," Henry said suddenly. "My family. My mother especially. She always said the measure of a person was in their hands, in what they created and how they treated the things they made. You would have impressed her." "I wish I could have met them," Louisa said softly. "They sound like wonderful people." "They were," Henry agreed. "That is what made losing them so hard. The world became a worse place when they left it." Louisa set down the piece she had been working on and moved to stand in front of Henry. He was sitting on a stool, which put them nearly at eye level for once. Without overthinking it, she reached out and cupped his bearded cheek in her hand. "I am so sorry for your loss," she said. "And I am sorry you have been carrying that pain alone for so long. But Henry, they would not have wanted that for you. They would have wanted you to live, to find joy again, to let yourself be part of the world." Henry's hand came up to cover hers, pressing it more firmly against his face. "I know," he said hoarsely. "But I did not know how. Did not know if I even wanted to anymore. Until I walked into this shop and saw you standing there with fire and metal, creating beauty from raw materials. Something in me woke up that I thought was dead." Louisa's breath caught. "Henry." I came back a week ago, not because I needed supplies, he confessed. I came back because I could not stop thinking about you. And when I heard those men bothering you, I felt something I had not felt in years. Fear. Real fear that something might happen to you. And I knew then that I was in trouble, because you had gotten under my skin somehow, made me care again when I had sworn I never would. I care too, Louisa whispered. I have been trying not to, telling myself you would leave and go back to your mountains and I would never see you again. But I cannot help it, Henry. When you are near, everything feels more vivid, more real. And the thought of you leaving makes my chest ache. Henry stood slowly, and Louisa had to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. He was so large, so imposing, but she had never felt safer than she did in his presence. His hands came up to frame her face, his thumbs brushing gently across her cheekbones. I am not good at this, he said. Have not been close to anyone in so long. Might mess it up. Might not know the right things to say or do. I do not need perfect, Louisa said. I just need honest. I need you. Henry leaned down slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. But Louisa rose on her toes to meet him halfway. Their lips touched softly at first. A gentle exploration that sent warmth cascading through her entire body. Then Henry made a low sound in his chest and deepened the kiss, his arms wrapping around her and lifting her nearly off her feet. Louisa's hands fisted in his shirt, holding on as the world spun and narrowed to just this moment, this man, this perfect rightness. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Henry rested his forehead against hers. Louisa, he said, her name almost a prayer. You have melted something in me. My heart has been cold and hard as metal for so long, but you have warmed it, softened it, turned it into something new, something gold. Tears pricked Louisa's eyes. You have changed me too, made me see that there is more to life than just work and routine. You have made me feel alive. They stood holding each other for a long time, neither wanting to break the connection. Finally, Louisa pulled back slightly and smiled up at him. We should probably finish those candlesticks, she said, or my father will come home to find us behind on all our orders. Practical, Henry said with a small smile that transformed his usually serious face. I like that about you. They returned to work, but everything felt different now. Every glance across the workshop carried weight. Every accidental touch sent sparks through Louisa's body. She caught Henry watching her as she worked, his gray eyes warm with something that looked like wonder, as if he could not quite believe this was real. That evening, they made supper together, moving around the small kitchen in a dance that felt remarkably natural considering how recently they had admitted their feelings. Henry proved surprisingly competent at cooking, revealing that 7 years of bachelor living had taught him to fend for himself. I cannot survive on jerky and whatever I can hunt, he explained as he chopped vegetables with practiced efficiency. Learned to make decent stew, bread, even pie when I can get the ingredients. A man of many talents, Louisa teased. Just survival skills, Henry replied. Nothing fancy. I think it is impressive, Louisa said. Most men I know cannot boil water without burning it. They ate supper on the small porch behind the house, watching stars begin to appear in the deepening sky. The desert air cooled quickly once the sun set, and Louisa shivered slightly in her thin dress. Without a word, Henry went inside, then returned with a blanket that he draped around her shoulders. Thank you, she said, pulling it close. Henry sat down beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. Tell me something, he said. If you could go anywhere, do anything, what would it be? Louisa thought about it. "I think I would like to see the ocean," she said finally. "My mother used to tell me about it, how the water stretched forever and the sound of waves was like breathing. She grew up in Boston, right by the sea, and I think she missed it sometimes, even though she loved the desert." "California's not so far," Henry said. "Week on horseback, less if you took a stagecoach." "It might as well be 1,000 miles, Louisa said. "I cannot leave my father alone to manage the shop, and he cannot close it to go traveling. We have obligations, orders to fill." "What if you had someone to help?" Henry asked. "Someone who could keep the shop running while you took a trip?" Louisa looked at him, her heart beginning to race. "What are you suggesting?" Henry took her hand in his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "I am suggesting that maybe I do not need to go back to the mountains. Maybe I could stay here in town, help your father in the shop. I am strong, I can learn the work, and he already said he wants someone around to help anyway." "You would do that?" Louisa asked, hardly daring to believe it. "You would give up your solitude, your cabin, everything you have built up there?" "I built that life because I had nothing else," Henry said. "Because I was running from pain and memories and thought isolation was the answer. But you have shown me that it was not healing. It was just hiding. I do not want to hide anymore, Louisa. I want to live, and I want to live here with you, if you will have me." Tears spilled down Louisa's cheeks. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will have you. But Henry, are you sure? This is a huge change. What if you get here and find you cannot bear it, that you need the mountains too much?" "I will always love the mountains," Henry admitted. "But I love you more. And that is something I never thought I would say to anyone again." Louisa threw her arms around his neck, and Henry caught her, holding her tight against his chest. She could feel his heart beating strong and steady beneath her ear, and she knew with absolute certainty that this was right. That this man with his scarred hands and wounded heart was meant to be hers just as she was meant to be his. "I love you too," she whispered. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a short time. But I love you. Sometimes the heart knows things the head cannot explain," Henry said. "I knew the first time I walked into that shop and saw you surrounded by fire and metal, creating something beautiful. Something in me recognized something in you. Like calling to like." They sat together under the stars, making quiet plans for the future. Henry would stay in Agua Caliente permanently, would help Thomas in the shop and learn the pewter trade. Eventually, when Louisa and Henry married, as they both knew they would, they could expand the business. Maybe even teach their own children the craft someday. "Children," Henry said wonderingly. "I never let myself think about having a family again. Thought that chance died with everything else." "You will be an excellent father," Louisa said with certainty. "Strong and gentle and protective. Any child would be lucky to have you." "Our children," Henry corrected softly. "Our family. Starting over, doing it right this time." The 3 days until Thomas returned passed in a golden haze. Louisa and Henry worked together in the shop during the day, and in the evenings they would walk through the town or sit talking until late into the night. Henry began to relax around other people, though he still preferred the quiet of Louisa's company to crowds. She introduced him to a few of her friends, and while he remained reserved, he was polite and made an effort that touched her heart. On the evening before Thomas was due back, they closed the shop early, and Henry took Louisa up into the foothills surrounding Agua Caliente. They climbed to a high point that overlooked the town and the surrounding desert, painted in shades of purple and gold by the setting sun. "This is what the mountains are like," Henry said, gesturing to the vast landscape spread below them. "But higher, with trees instead of cactus, and snow on the peaks. I will take you there someday, show you my cabin and the places I love. But I want you to know that I am not giving up something precious to stay here. I am gaining something more precious than anything I am leaving behind." "I want to see your mountains," Louisa said. "I want to know all the places that are important to you. But I also want you to know all the places that are important to me, all the corners of this little town that have meaning." "We have time," Henry said. "We have all the time in the world now." He pulled a small wrapped bundle from his pocket and handed it to her. "Made this yesterday while you were working on those buckles. It is not much, but I wanted you to have something." Louisa unwrapped it carefully and gasped. Inside was a ring, but not one made of metal from the shop. This ring was carved from what looked like bone or antler, polished to a soft sheen and etched with an intricate pattern of mountains and stars. "Henry, it is beautiful," she breathed. "Where did you learn to carve like this?" "Something I taught myself during the long winters," Henry explained. "Needed something to do with my hands when I was trapped in the cabin by snow. Never made jewelry before. But I wanted you to have something that came from me, from the mountains that shaped me into who I am now." Louisa slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if made exactly for her. "I love it. I will treasure it always." "It is a promise," Henry said. "Promise that I am yours, that I choose this life with you over the solitary one I left behind. When your father returns and we tell him about us, I hope he will give his blessing. And then, when enough time has passed that it is proper, I hope you will marry me." "Yes," Louisa said immediately. "Yes to all of it. And I do not care about what is proper. If you asked me to marry you right now, I would say yes." "Your father might have something to say about that," Henry said with a smile. "I need to do this right, Louisa. Need to ask his permission, court you properly, show him that I am serious about taking care of you." "You have already shown that," Louisa pointed out. "From the moment you defended me from those cowboys, you have been taking care of me." "That was different," Henry said. "That was instinct. This is choice. This is me choosing you every day, choosing to be the man you deserve." They stayed on the hillside until full dark, reluctant to leave the privacy and peace of their high perch. When they finally descended back to town, Henry walked Louisa to her door and kissed her goodnight with a tenderness that made her knees weak. "Tomorrow your father returns," he said. "Tomorrow we start the next part of this journey." "I cannot wait," Louisa said, and she meant it with her whole heart. Thomas returned the following afternoon, tired but pleased with his trip to Phoenix. The hotel commission was confirmed, a substantial order that would keep them busy for months and bring in significant income. He was in such good spirits that Louisa decided it was the perfect time to tell him about Henry. That evening after supper, as the three of them sat around the table with coffee, Louisa reached under the table and squeezed Henry's hand for courage. "Father, Henry and I have something we need to tell you," she began. Thomas set down his cup and looked between them with sudden concern. "Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong," Louisa assured him quickly. "Actually, something is very right. Father, Henry and I have developed feelings for each other, strong feelings, and he has asked if he can court me with the intention of eventual marriage." Thomas sat back in his chair, his expression unreadable. Louisa held her breath, waiting for his reaction. Finally, her father turned to Henry. "Is this true, Mr. Harrison? You wish to marry my daughter?" "Yes, sir," Henry said firmly. "I know we have not known each other long, and I know my circumstances are unusual. But I love your daughter, and I believe I can make her happy. I am willing to stay in Agua Caliente, to help you in the shop, to provide for her and any family we might have. I am not a rich man, but I am honest and hardworking, and I will treat her with the respect and care she deserves." "And you love her?" Thomas asked. "Truly love her? This is not just loneliness speaking after years alone in the mountains?" "I am sure," Henry said. "Your daughter has changed my life, sir. She has given me hope when I thought I had none left. She has melted the coldness in my heart and turned it to gold. I would be honored to spend the rest of my life earning her love in return." Thomas was quiet for a long moment, and Louisa's anxiety grew with each passing second. Then her father smiled, his eyes suspiciously bright. "My daughter's mother would have liked you," he said to Henry. "She always said I needed to find someone with a good heart to take care of Louisa when I was gone. I thought I had years to worry about that. But perhaps Providence has brought you to us exactly when you were needed. Yes, Mr. Harrison, you have my blessing to court my daughter, and when the time comes, you have my blessing to marry her as well." Louisa leaped from her chair and hugged her father, tears of joy streaming down her face. "Thank you, Father. Thank you so much." "Be happy, my dear girl," Thomas said, patting her back. "That is all I have ever wanted for you. And Mr. Harrison, I am serious about my offer of work. If you are truly staying in Agua Caliente, I would be glad to have you as a partner in the business. You have a natural aptitude for the work, and with training you could become a fine craftsman." "I would be honored, sir," Henry said, standing to shake Thomas's hand. "Thank you for your trust." "Call me Thomas," Louisa's father said. "We are going to be family after all." The next few months were the happiest of Louisa's life. Henry moved out of the storage room and into a small house he rented on the edge of town, maintaining propriety while still being close enough to work at the shop every day. He threw himself into learning the pewter trade with the same intensity he brought to everything else. And Thomas proved to be an excellent teacher. Soon Henry was capable of handling many of the basic tasks, freeing up Thomas and Louisa to focus on the more intricate work. The town gradually accepted Henry's presence, though some remained wary of the quiet mountain man who had suddenly appeared in their midst. But Henry's actions spoke louder than gossip. When the schoolhouse needed repairs, he volunteered his labor. When old Mrs. Patterson's roof leaked during a rare rainstorm, he was there to fix it. When Mr. Chen's general store received a shipment too heavy for the elderly shopkeeper to manage alone, Henry appeared to help unload. Slowly but surely, he became part of the community's fabric, though he never lost his preference for quiet and small groups. Louisa watched with pride as the man she loved found his place in the world again, becoming not the person he had been before the war, but someone new, forged from pain and loss, but tempered with love and hope. They were married in December on a crisp, clear day, with the desert sun warming the small church. Louisa wore a dress of cream silk with pewter buttons she had cast herself, and Henry wore a new suit that made him look both handsome and slightly uncomfortable. Reverend Matthews performed the ceremony, and the whole town turned out to see the Pewterer's daughter marry the mountain man who had given up his solitude for love. When Henry kissed his bride, there was a collective sigh from the assembled crowd, and Louisa heard more than one woman whisper that it was the most romantic thing they had ever witnessed. She did not care about the opinions of others, though. All that mattered was the feeling of Henry's arms around her and the knowledge that they belonged to each other now, fully and completely. They honeymooned not by traveling somewhere exotic, but by taking a week to ride up into Henry's mountains. He showed her his cabin, a sturdy structure he had built with his own hands, nestled in a high valley surrounded by pine trees and overlooking a crystal stream. They spent their days exploring the wilderness and their nights wrapped in each other's arms before the fireplace, learning each other's bodies and souls with equal passion. "Are you sure you do not miss this?" Louisa asked one evening as they sat outside watching the stars overhead. "It is so beautiful and peaceful here." "I miss it," Henry admitted. "But I do not need it anymore. Not the way I did. Before, the mountains were my escape, my hiding place. Now they are just a beautiful place I can visit when I want peace and quiet. But home is where you are, Louisa. Home is waking up next to you every morning and falling asleep with you every night. Home is the shop in our house and your father's terrible jokes over breakfast. That is what I chose, and I would choose it 1,000 times over." When they returned to Agua Caliente, they moved into a larger house that Thomas helped them purchase as a wedding gift. It had a spare room that could serve as a nursery, though they did not speak of that possibility yet. Content to simply enjoy being newlyweds, Henry continued to work in the shop, and his skills improved until he was creating pieces of his own design. His work had a different character from Thomas's or Louisa's, rougher and more organic, but beautiful in its own way. Customers began requesting his pieces specifically, appreciating the unique style. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. Winter passed into spring, spring into summer. Louisa and Henry's love deepened from passionate infatuation into something steadier and stronger. A partnership of equals who brought out the best in each other. Thomas flourished with Henry's help, no longer bearing all the physical demands of the business alone, and the shop prospered. In late summer, Louisa realized she had missed her monthly courses and felt a flutter of nervous excitement. She waited another month to be sure before telling Henry, wanting to be absolutely certain. When she was finally confident, she chose an evening when Thomas was visiting a friend to share the news. "Henry," she said as they sat together after supper, her hand clasped in his, "I have something to tell you, and I hope it will make you as happy as it makes me." Henry's gray eyes searched her face, reading something there that made them widen. "Louisa, we are going to have a baby," she said, tears of joy pooling in her eyes. "In late winter, probably February or March." For a moment, Henry simply stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then he let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob, and pulled her into his arms so tightly she could barely breathe. "A baby," he repeated, his voice thick with emotion. "Our baby. Louisa, I never thought I would get this chance, that I would have a family again. You have given me everything." "We have given each other everything," Louisa corrected, pulling back to look at his face. Tears ran freely down his cheeks, into his beard, and she had never loved him more than in that moment of raw, vulnerable joy. Thomas was thrilled when they told him, immediately beginning to plan how they would rearrange work schedules to accommodate Louisa's pregnancy and the baby's arrival. He commissioned a cradle from the town's carpenter and began setting aside money for his grandchild's future. "My wife would have been so happy," he said wistfully one evening. "She always wanted grandchildren. I wish she could have met you, Henry, and seen how happy you make our Louisa." "I wish I could have met her too," Henry said sincerely. "But I like to think she knows somehow. And I promise you, Thomas, I will do everything in my power to take care of both Louisa and our child. They will never want for anything I can provide." "I know you will," Thomas said. "You are a good man, Henry Harrison. The best man my daughter could have chosen." Winter came early that year, with unusually cold temperatures for the desert. Louisa grew round with pregnancy, blooming with health despite occasional morning sickness. Henry was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly worrying about her lifting anything heavy or standing too long at the forge. Louisa found it endearing, even when it was frustrating. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," she reminded him regularly. "Women have been doing this since the beginning of time. I will not break." "But you might," Henry would reply, "and I could not bear it if something happened to you." His worry came from a place of love and old trauma, and Louisa understood that. So she let him fuss over her and did not protest too much when he insisted on taking over more of the physically demanding work. In late February, as the first hints of spring began to show in the budding trees and early wildflowers, Louisa's labor began. The midwife was summoned, and Henry paced the house like a caged mountain lion, while Thomas tried ineffectually to calm him. "Women do this every day," Thomas repeated for what must have been the 100th time. "Louisa is strong and healthy. She will be fine." "You do not know that," Henry said tightly. "Things can go wrong. People die in childbirth." "She will not," Thomas said firmly. "You have to believe that, Henry. She needs you to be strong for her right now, not falling apart with worry." Henry took a deep breath and nodded. He was allowed into the bedroom periodically to see Louisa and hold her hand through contractions, and each time he left, he looked more shaken by her pain. But he never let her see his fear, always presenting a calm, confident face and telling her how well she was doing, how proud he was of her. As evening fell and gave way to night, the labor intensified. Louisa was exhausted, her face pale and drawn, and Henry's heart clenched with fear every time he saw her. But she never complained, never cried out for it to stop. She bore the pain with the same quiet strength she brought to everything else. Finally, in the early hours of the morning, their son was born. His first cry was the most beautiful sound Henry had ever heard, and when the midwife cleaned and wrapped the baby and placed him in Henry's arms, he felt something break open in his chest. The tiny infant had a cap of dark hair and his mother's delicate features, and he was absolutely perfect. "A boy," Henry whispered, tears streaming down his face. "Louisa, we have a son. Let me see him," Louisa said weakly from the bed, and Henry carefully placed the baby in her arms. She looked down at their child with such love and wonder that Henry felt his heart might burst. "What should we name him?" she asked. Henry thought about the family he had lost, about the new family he had gained, about the journey that had brought him from the loneliness of the mountains to this moment of perfect joy. "William," he said, "after my father, if that is acceptable to you." "William Harrison," Louisa said, trying out the name. "I love it. Welcome to the world, William. You are so very loved." Thomas was allowed in to meet his grandson, and the old man wept openly at the sight of the tiny baby. "He looks like you did, Louisa, when you were born. Same serious expression, as if he already knows this world is a complicated place." "He will have a good life," Henry said firmly. "Better than the one I had. He will grow up knowing peace and love and security. I swear it." The months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. William proved to be a healthy baby with strong lungs and definite opinions about when he should eat and sleep. Henry took to fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else, learning to change diapers and prepare bottles, walking the floor with his son at all hours when William refused to settle. Louisa watched her husband with their child and fell in love with him all over again. The tenderness with which he handled their tiny son, the way he would sing old songs his own mother had taught him in a surprisingly melodic voice, the fierce protectiveness in his eyes when he looked at William. All of it made her heart swell with love. "You are an amazing father," she told him one night as he rocked William back to sleep after a midnight feeding. "I am trying to be," Henry replied quietly. "Trying to be the father I remember my own being. The father this boy deserves. Every time I look at him, I think about how close I came to never having this, to spending my whole life alone in those mountains, convinced I did not deserve happiness. And I thank God that I was wrong, that I walked into your shop that day and you melted the coldness that had turned my heart to metal. You gave me adventure and love when I had resigned myself to a quiet, predictable life," Louisa said. "We saved each other, Henry." As William grew from infant to toddler, the business continued to thrive. Henry had become an accomplished craftsman in his own right, and the shop's reputation spread beyond Agua Caliente to other towns and even cities. Orders came in steadily, and Thomas began talking about eventually retiring and leaving the business to Henry and Louisa. When William was 2 years old, Louisa discovered she was pregnant again. This time the news was less surprising, but no less joyful. Henry was calmer about the pregnancy, having been through it once before, though he remained attentive and protective. Their daughter was born in autumn during a spectacular sunset that painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. They named her Grace, and she had her father's gray eyes and a shock of light brown hair. William was fascinated by his baby sister, always wanting to help care for her and bring her toys. "We have been blessed beyond measure," Henry said one evening as the family sat together in their living room. William was playing with wooden blocks Henry had carved for him while Grace nursed contentedly at Louisa's breast. "I never imagined I would have all this." "Do you ever miss it?" Louisa asked. "The mountains, the solitude, the simple life you had before?" Henry considered the question seriously. "I miss the mountains sometimes," he admitted, "the beauty and peace of them. But I do not miss the loneliness, and I do not miss who I was becoming up there, harder and colder with each passing year. You thawed me, Louisa. You took my cold, metallic heart and melted it down and reshaped it into something better, something gold. And these children, this life we have built, this is worth more than all the solitude in the world." Years passed in a happy blur. William grew into a thoughtful, intelligent boy who showed interest in the family business, often spending hours watching his parents and grandfather work. Grace was spirited and charming, with her father's quiet strength and her mother's creative talents. The shop continued to prosper, and eventually Thomas did retire, spending his days caring for his grandchildren and puttering in the garden he had cultivated behind the house. When William was 8 and Grace was 6, Louisa suggested taking a family trip to California to see the ocean she had always dreamed of visiting. Henry agreed immediately, and that summer they made the journey west, traveling by stagecoach and train until they reached the coast. Louisa's first sight of the Pacific Ocean brought tears to her eyes. It was everything her mother had described and more, vast and powerful and beautiful beyond words. The children were entranced, running along the beach and shrieking with delight when waves chased them back to shore. Henry stood beside his wife with his arm around her shoulders, watching their children play. "Thank you," Louisa said, "for making this possible, for giving me not just this trip, but this entire life. I love you so much, Henry." "I love you too," Henry replied, "more than I have words to express. You saved me, Louisa. In every way a person can be saved. I was drowning in loneliness and pain, turning into something hard and cold and lifeless. But you melted that away, transformed me into something new. You are my heart, my home, my everything." They kissed as their children laughed and played nearby, the waves providing a rhythmic soundtrack to the moment. It was perfect, this life they had built together from chance and chemistry and choice. When they returned to Agua Caliente, Thomas was waiting with news. The town council wanted to commission a large piece for the new courthouse they were building. Something that would showcase local craftsmanship and become a centerpiece for the community. It would be the largest and most prestigious commission the shop had ever received. "We should do it together," Thomas said. 3 generations working together to create something that will last beyond all of us. They spent 6 months on the project, designing and creating an elaborate chandelier with intricate pewter work that would hang in the courthouse's main hall. Even the children helped in small ways, with William learning to pour metal under careful supervision and Grace designing some of the decorative elements. When it was finally complete and installed, the entire town came to see it, and the shop received accolades from newspapers as far away as Phoenix and Tucson. "Your mother would have been so proud," Thomas said to Louisa as they stood looking up at their creation. "Of the work, yes, but more importantly of the life you have built, the family you have created. This is legacy, my dear. This is what matters." Louisa squeezed her father's hand, then reached for Henry's on her other side. Her children stood in front of them, looking up at the chandelier with wonder. This was her life, these people, this moment. And it was more than she had ever dared to dream. As the years continued to pass, Henry and Louisa remained deeply in love, their bond strengthening rather than fading with time. They added a 3rd child to their family when Grace was 5, another son they named Thomas after Louisa's father. The elder Thomas adored his namesake, spending countless hours with the boy and teaching him about plants and gardening. William grew into a young man who indeed took over much of the metalwork, showing a natural aptitude that delighted his parents. Grace discovered a talent for the business side of things, managing orders and customers with charm and efficiency. Young Thomas was still finding his way, but showed promise in drawing and design. Henry never lost his love for the mountains, and several times a year he would take the family up to his old cabin for a week or 2 of peace and quiet away from town. The children loved these trips, learning to hunt and fish and appreciate the wilderness that had shaped their father. Louisa found she enjoyed the mountains as well, understanding now what had drawn Henry to them, even as she was grateful he had chosen to leave them for her. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Henry surprised Louisa with a gift. He had been working on it in secret for months, and when he presented it to her, she gasped in amazement. It was a tea service, but unlike anything she had ever seen. Each piece was crafted from the pewter they worked with every day. But Henry had inlaid designs in gold, actual gold that he had saved for and worked painstakingly into the metal. The patterns were of mountains and desert flowers, stars and sun, all the elements of their shared life together. "Henry, this must have cost a fortune," Louisa said, her hands shaking as she lifted the teapot. "The gold alone." "You are worth a fortune," Henry replied. "You are worth everything. I wanted to create something that showed how you transformed me, how you took the cold metal of my heart and turned it to gold. This is what you did for me, Louisa. You made me precious again. You made me valuable, not for what I could do or provide, but for who I am. That is a gift beyond price." Louisa set down the teapot carefully and wrapped her arms around her husband. "You have always been precious," she said. "From the moment you walked into that shop so many years ago, you were valuable. I just helped you see it." "We saved each other," Henry said, echoing words they had spoken before. "And we built something beautiful together." Thomas Wright passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, surrounded by the family who loved him. His funeral was well attended, with people coming from all over the territory to pay their respects to the man who had served Agua Caliente for so many years. Louisa grieved deeply for her father, but took comfort in knowing he had lived a good life and died knowing his daughter was happy and provided for. In his will, Thomas left the shop and house to Louisa and Henry, along with a letter expressing his pride in them both and his gratitude to Henry for taking such good care of his daughter. "You gave her adventure and stability both," he wrote. "You gave her love and partnership and a family. You were the son I never had and the son-in-law I always hoped for. Take care of my grandchildren and continue the good work we started together. I will be watching from wherever we go next, proud of all you accomplish." Life continued in its natural rhythms. William married a kind woman named Sarah, who worked at the general store, and they gave Henry and Louisa their first grandchildren, twin boys who kept everyone busy and entertained. Grace fell in love with a schoolteacher from Phoenix who relocated to Agua Caliente to be with her, and their wedding was the social event of the season. Young Thomas eventually discovered a passion for engineering and left to study in San Francisco, though he returned often to visit. As Henry and Louisa aged, they gradually stepped back from the day-to-day operations of the shop, leaving it in William's capable hands while they enjoyed their grandchildren and the peaceful life they had built. They would sit together on the porch in the evenings, Henry with his arm around Louisa's shoulders, watching the sun set over the desert they both loved. "Do you ever regret it?" Louisa asked one evening, the question coming from nowhere. "Giving up your mountains, your solitude, the life you knew?" Henry looked at her in surprise. "Never," he said firmly. "Not once in all these years." "Why would you ask that now?" "I do not know," Louisa admitted. "Sometimes I think about that first day you walked into the shop, how different you were then. So closed off, so alone. And I wonder if maybe you gave up too much." "I gave up nothing," Henry said. "Or rather, I gave up a half-life for a full one. I was existing in those mountains, Louisa, not living. Just going through motions, surviving but not thriving. You woke me up. You showed me that I could feel again, love again, be part of the world again. That is not a sacrifice. That is salvation." "But you loved the mountains," Louisa persisted. "I still love them," Henry said. "We visit them often enough. But they were never home, not really. They were a refuge, a hiding place. Home is wherever you are. Home is the family we built together, the children and grandchildren who carry on our legacy. Home is this porch where we sit every evening, and this town that accepted a broken mountain man and let him heal." He pulled her closer and kissed her temple. "You melted my cold heart to gold, Louisa. You transformed me from something hard and dead into something living and precious. How could I ever regret that? Every day I wake up grateful that I walked into your shop, that you saw something in me worth saving, that you gave me a chance to be more than the shell I had become." Louisa leaned into his embrace, content. "We saved each other," she repeated their familiar refrain. "We did," Henry agreed. "And we built something worth saving. Look at all this, Louisa. Our children, our grandchildren, the business that employs half the town, the friendships we have made, the life we have lived. This is what matters. This is what lasts." They sat together as the sky turned from gold to purple to deep blue, stars beginning to appear one by one. Inside the house, they could hear their grandchildren laughing and their children's voices calling them to supper. It was ordinary and extraordinary at once, this life they had created from chance and choice and love. Years later, when Henry was in his early 60s and Louisa had just turned 58, they made one last trip to Henry's mountain cabin. They rode up together on horseback, just the two of them, leaving the grandchildren with William and Grace. The cabin had been maintained over the years, used as a family retreat. But it had been a long time since Henry and Louisa had been there alone. They spent a week in the mountains, reliving their honeymoon, walking the trails Henry knew by heart, fishing in the stream, and sitting by the fire in the evenings. One night, as they lay wrapped in blankets looking up at the stars through the cabin's open door, Louisa asked Henry to tell her again about the first time he saw her. "I was convinced I would spend the rest of my life alone," Henry began, his voice soft in the darkness. "Had accepted it, even preferred it, or so I told myself. Then I needed a new cup because mine got crushed, and I came down to town. Walked into that shop, and there you were, surrounded by fire and molten metal, creating something beautiful with your own hands. The sun was coming through the window and lighting up your hair, and you had this look of absolute concentration on your face. And something in me just woke up, like I had been asleep for 7 years and suddenly someone rang a bell. I remember thinking you looked dangerous," Louisa said with a soft laugh. "So big and wild, with that beard and those intense eyes. But then you spoke, and your voice was gentle. And when you touched my cup, you were so careful with it. I knew then that you were not what you appeared to be, that underneath all that roughness was someone worth knowing. You took a chance on me, and son," Henry said. "Could have dismissed me as just another rough customer, could have let those cowboys chase me away, could have told your father you were not interested when we confessed our feelings. But you did not. You saw something in me I could not see in myself, and you called it forth. You made me want to be better, to be more, to be the man you deserved. You were always that man," Louisa said. "You just needed to remember it." They fell silent, content to simply be together in the place where Henry's old life had ended and his new one had begun. In the morning, they would ride back down to Agua Caliente, to their family and their business and their responsibilities. But for this night, they were just Henry and Louisa, the mountain man and the Pewterer's daughter who had found each other against all odds and built a love that had lasted decades. When they did return to town, they found their family waiting with news. Sarah was pregnant again, and Grace's daughter had just gotten engaged. Life was moving forward, new generations taking over, the cycle continuing. Henry and Louisa watched it all with contentment, knowing they had done their part, had created something that would outlast them. Henry lived to the age of 76, remaining strong and active until the very end. When a stroke took him suddenly one autumn morning, he died in Louisa's arms, his last words a whispered, "I love you," that she would carry with her always. The entire town turned out for his funeral, testament to the impact he had made in the decades since he had given up his solitary mountain life. Louisa grieved deeply, but not hopelessly. She had their children and grandchildren, and even great-grandchildren by then. A whole clan that carried Henry's legacy forward. The shop continued to operate, now in its 4th generation of family ownership. And the tea service Henry had made for their 20th anniversary sat in a place of honor in her home. She lived another 15 years, surrounded by family and love, continuing to work with pewter almost until the end. Her hands, gnarled with age, but still skilled, could shape metal with the same artistry they had possessed in her youth. And every piece she created, she dedicated to Henry in her heart, the mountain man who had given up everything for love and found that he had gained everything instead. When Louisa Wright Harrison finally passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 93, She was laid to rest beside her husband in the Agua Caliente cemetery. Their headstone was simple but elegant, carved with mountains and desert flowers, with an inscription that read, "She melted his cold heart to gold." Together, they built a legacy of love. Their great-grandson, also named Henry, spoke at the funeral about his great-grandparents' legendary love story. They proved that it is never too late to change, never too late to love, never too late to begin again, he said. My great-grandfather came down from his mountain, a broken man, and my great-grandmother saw past the damage to the person he could be. Together, they created not just a family, but a testament to the transformative power of love. We are all here because they chose each other, because they were brave enough to take a chance on something that must have seemed impossible at first. That is the legacy they leave us, not just their business or their craft, but their example of what love can do when we let it in. The shop continued for another generation, before eventually being converted into a museum dedicated to the history of Agua Caliente and the craft of pewter working. The tea service Henry had made for Louisa became the centerpiece of the collection. Behind glass, but still gleaming, the gold inlay catching the light and reminding everyone who saw it of the mountain man and the pewterer's daughter, whose love had become legend. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the museum was closed and the desert sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, people swore they could see two figures walking hand in hand through the streets of Agua Caliente, a large man with long hair and a woman with a quiet smile. Forever young, forever in love, forever proving that even the coldest heart can be melted and transformed when the right person comes along. Their story became the stuff of local legend, told and retold with each generation, embellished and romanticized, but always true at its core. The mountain man who gave up his solitude, the pewterer's daughter who saw past his rough exterior, and the love that transformed them both. It was a story about second chances and new beginnings, about the courage to choose connection over isolation, about the alchemy of love that can turn cold metal to gold. And in the end, that was the true masterpiece Henry and Louisa created together. Not any piece of metalwork, no matter how beautiful, but a life built on love and trust and mutual transformation, a legacy that lasted long after they were gone, inspiring others to take chances, to see past surfaces, to believe in the possibility of redemption and renewal. They had proven that it is never too late to change, never too late to love, never too late to become the person you were always meant to be. And that lesson, more than anything else, was what they left behind. A gift to all who came after, a testament to the enduring power of love to transform everything it touches.